Miigwech. Thank you, Adam, for moderating this very important session. Thank you, Regional Chief Paul, for the welcome, for National Chief Cindy Woodhouse Nipanek for joining us, and also for representing the First Nations, representing Canada at the funeral of His Holiness Pope Francis. I would also like to thank Knowledge Keeper Lionel Weasel Traveler for beginning this meeting in the good way and for the opening prayer. Les discussions comme celles que nous aurons aujourd'hui sont les fondations sur lesquelles s'appuie le processus de réconciliation entre le gouvernement du Canada et le peuple autochtone. Il nous faut de vrais échanges, de nation à nation, pour bâtir de vraies relations de nation à nation. I recognize that the previous government made reconciliation a priority. I want to start out by making it clear that if elected, my government will reinforce that momentum, because while there has been progress over the last decade, this table, this group, and myself know that there is much more to do together. I know it will take time to build relationships with those represented on the call and with the communities across the country. Mais si les Canadiens et Canadiennes me confient la responsabilité de les servir en tant que Premier ministre, j'espère d'avoir de nombreuses occasions de participer à tel échange, de contribuer à bâtir de fortes relations entre le gouvernement du Canada et les Premières Nations. As Regional Chief Paul mentioned, this is a crucial election. It's a crucial time. We are tackling the crisis created by President Trump's repeated attacks on Canada, but also marking the 10th year of beginning of an important process of reconciliation. And many more steps need to be taken on that road. True partnership with Indigenous peoples will be essential to building Canada strong. That's why one of my first acts as Prime Minister, and we'll have a chance to talk about this, was to make that commitment concrete in doubling the Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program. But really, this goes to a fundamental issue, which is that partnership with Indigenous peoples, partnerships with First Nations, has to be at the center of our actions. Whether it's building one Canadian economy out of 13, whether it's accelerating the realization of those nation-building projects that Regional Chief Paul just referenced, whether it's building new trade infrastructure, our electricity grid, building new careers in the skilled trades, protecting our natural fighting climate change alongside Indigenous guardians and beyond. It has to be in inclusive partnership with strong, safe, and prosperous First Nations. And so that's also why my government, if elected, will be committed to advancing self-determination, working in partnership on the implementation of treaties, on land claims, and of self-government agreements, to implementing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act and its action plan, and to moving forward on the calls for justice from the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, and to answering all of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action. This is the work we must do together. I look forward to our exchange now. And as I say, if the Canadian people place confidence in me and my party, working with you as on behalf of the Government of Canada. Thank you, and Adam, I will pass back to you to run the show.
Great, thank you very much, Leader Mark Carney with the federal, of course, Liberal Party of Canada. So we'll get right into the questions. We have the 5 themes. The first theme, of course, is dealing with the Canada-U.S. border and trade. So the question is, Mr. Carney, how will you include First Nations in First Ministers' meetings and other federal, provincial, and territorial meetings on Canada-U.S. border security and trade?
Well, thank you. This is a crucial point, and I think part of my answer is inaction. So we have to start as you mean to go on. So within my first days as Prime Minister, I believe it was day 2, met with National Chief Cindy Woodhouse Nepanak, direct bilateral meeting between the two of us. Shortly thereafter, a few days after, met with all the Indigenous leaders and scoped out an approach to exactly these sets of issues around how we respond specifically before we respond to the American tariff attack. So what are our potential countermeasures for that, or so-called counter tariffs, which are the first types of measures we've taken? How is the process developed for so-called remissions, which are ways to ensure that those measures against the Americans do not affect First Nations, do not affect our businesses directly, so that we make adjustments to them. And then, and very importantly, and I think, Adam, we'll get to this in more detail, the main element of our response is doing things that we should be doing for ourselves anyways, which is to build Canada strong from infrastructure through to new trading partners. And those processes, and I've made this clear repeatedly, both in action and in our platform and how I've spoken about it, can only proceed in partnership, in full partnership with First Nations. Now, I'm going to just make an observation that sometimes, and this is a scale, and I'm going to hand back to you after this, Adam, that I think this is sometimes show the scale of the challenge, because I make this observation, and some will interpret that as me not being committed to some of these projects. And I make a distinction between a project that looks good from an economic perspective, that can create wealth, but it can only do that if that wealth is properly shared. It can only do that if it has the support of First Nations, and of course of the relevant provinces as well. And it tells me that we still have a ways to go, not with my government if we are reelected, but as Canada, to a full understanding of what this partnership means and how integral it has to be to our economic development.
Thank you, Mr. Carney. So we'll transition into the next theme. And of course, you touched on it a little bit, infrastructure. So we'd like to talk about the First Nations infrastructure gap. So Mr. Carney, the question is, what steps will you take in the first year and then throughout your term, if elected, to close the First Nations infrastructure gap?
Well, let me start by commending the work that has been done, catalyzed by the AFN on identifying the scale of the First Nation infrastructure gap and the potential economic opportunity that would be created by our closing this. I'm going to put it in tangible terms, or relative terms maybe is the best way to do it, which is that if we were to close the First Nations infrastructure gap, that alone would have a bigger economic impact than the negative aspect of all the Trump tariffs if they were to remain in place. Okay, so it's the right thing to do, but also economically, the scale of it provides a huge return to First Nations, but to the Canadian economy as well. Secondly, as was referenced earlier, and I made this reference, we have a host of other infrastructure or related infrastructure projects that can be developed. And I think in terms of the approach that I would recommend on, and the approach, not just recommend, the approach that we will take if we are elected, is first to be led by First Nations in terms of the infrastructure priorities. Obviously, that is by definition the case in closing the First Nations infrastructure gap, self-identified infrastructure projects that have the priority. The second thing, which I think is essential, is that we provide predictable funding, and predictable funding that is a funding envelope, if I can use that term, as opposed to only project-specific funding, because we have to match First Nations-led with financing certainty, or financing visibility, a better way to put it, financing visibility so those projects can move through. The third thing is that in many cases, there are shortages of land on reserve lands in order to fulfill the infrastructure needs of First Nations. And so speeding up what is quite a cumbersome process for the addition of reserve lands. The fourth thing and I'm trying to be very tangible here, Adam. The fourth thing that we would do, well, actually, we have proposed and will happen very quickly if my government is elected, is to double the Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program. And I'll take 1 minute, if I can, just to explain what that is. That is now a $10 billion program. It will be a $10 billion program. And what it does is it finances ownership stakes by First Nations in projects. So it's not a loan per se, it is the financing of the ownership stake. So it moves participation from a process to actual ownership. And as well, what we're proposing to do is expand the range of projects very dramatically that these loans or these financings can be used for. Yes, energy, but also clean energy, critical minerals, port infrastructure, transportation infrastructure. You see a very wide range that will be there. Last two things I will mention, I'll mention them as one, which is continuing to work with the Canadian Infrastructure Bank to make sure that that funding is effective and suited to the needs of First Nations, and exploring the proposals, interesting proposals for an Indigenous infrastructure bank.
So we'd like to transition into discussing water on reserve. So the question is, Mr. Carney, what's your plan to introduce a bill similar to Bill C-61, the First Nations Clean Water Act, and finally end outstanding boil water advisories on reserve?
Okay, thank you. I think this is a fundamental issue, as you know, it's a fundamental human right, and recognizing that as such. It is a disappointment, obviously, that C-61 was one of the victims of the proroguing of Parliament, or the dysfunctionality, maybe is a better way to put it, of the previous Parliament proroguing and the election. So yes, the intention would be to reintroduce that. But I want to go to the heart of the practical implications of this, if I may, Adam, which is, as this group will know, I just checked the figures yesterday. If my figures are right, 147 bans have been listed over the course of the last 10 years. On the original list, there are 35 left, but there are 82 new that have come back on. So that shows that progress has been made, but not as much. And what that suggests to me is that we need a more comprehensive approach that ensures there's not just resources, but there's also capacity to deliver the capital spends that are necessary to end these bans, but also the operations and maintenance and monitoring that's necessary. So money, yes, but also more capacity. And I think one of the elements, so I'm saying yes to the specific question, but I'm moving on to what else should we be doing to make sure that we really deliver for people. And I think looking towards a model potentially, and this is an open question, and I take guidance on this, but a First Nations Water Commission or some type of model like that, that is ensuring that First Nations also have the capacity for maintenance and development, so that as we move these bans off, that they stay off and they maintain, and the funding is available for that, but also the capacity to do that. I think we probably need a structure that's more effective. That's my read from the outside. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we're going to talk about policing now. And so the question, Mr. Carney, is what steps will you take to call for a public inquiry into in-custody deaths, and also introduce a bill establishing First Nations policing as an essential service that also includes long-term funding and also recognition of First Nations jurisdiction?
Well, let me start from recognizing that this is an essential service, and that we have to move as quickly as possible to effective delivery of that essential services, those essential services with First Nations, or by First Nations rather. And there needs to be accountability, and I recognize as well the tragedy of in custody deaths. Now, on solutions to be practically beneficial to the communities, and to First Nations. We want to move to self-administered First Nation policing services. And as part of that process, I think what's inherent on us as the federal government, if my party were to form the government, is to develop legislation to give control over those policing services under a range of policing potential agreements, self-administered police service agreements, or community tripartite agreements, or the so-called municipal quadripartite agreements that potentially can move forward. So very much want to work forward on these models. And as I say, not just the legislation and the recognition, but the practical application again of the approaches that are going to make a difference.
Miigwech, thank you very much, Mr. Carney. So the final theme, very important as well to First Nations across the country, deals with children and families. So children and families, the question is, what steps will you take to provide long-term funding for Jordan's Principle and commitment to long-term reform of the discriminatory First Nations child welfare system?
Yes, well, I just made clear and I can understand if not everyone has had a chance to read or the inclination to read the Liberal Party platform, but exactly the question is at the heart of our commitments in the platform. So a commitment to long-term funding for Jordan's Principle and to reform of the discriminatory First Nations child welfare system. So that's clear. That is a commitment that's there. We recognize that concluding the ongoing reform of the First Nations Child and Family Services Program is critical to ensuring that the next generation of First Nations children do not experience the same harms that have occurred for too long. I'm very open to working with all parties to reach resolution on this. I think we all know the history in the course of the last few years and even most recent months. But full engagement of my government, if we are given the responsibility to serve by Canadians. There are many ways to get there, and I think we need to get back to the table with determination to achieve those two fundamental objectives: the long-term funding and the long-term reform of the system. There is a way to get there. We're going to be at the table and be there to serve it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carney. So at this point, what we're going to do is open it up for questions. We do have a number of several questions already lined up, and it looks like we probably won't get to everything with the amount of time we have, but we'll get through them as quickly as we can. Just a reminder, the process for those joining us: hit the Q&A function. There's an icon at the bottom of the screen, and then you can type in your question. We'll start, Mr. Carney. This is a question submitted by Dwayne Gaston Aucoin, councillor from Teslin Tlingit Council in the Yukon. So here's the question. Poilievre has said that his government would use the notwithstanding clause to override the charter to keep certain prisoners in jail indefinitely. Given the overrepresentation of First Nations people in the prison systems, actions like this would disproportionately impact First Nations people. So the question, Mr. Carney, is what is your position on respecting the charter and the use of the notwithstanding clause?
Thank you. Thank Mr. Aucoin for the question, because it's a fundamental question. And look, I am deeply troubled by the position of Mr. Poilievre. I made this point in the, I think it was in the English, it was in one of the debates, I think it was the English leaders debate, for several reasons. One, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms does exactly what it says. It protects our fundamental rights and freedoms. I think what we have seen with the Charter and with the protections of the Supreme Courts and our court system, it has been part of the process of a better appreciation of what the fundamental rights of all citizens of Canada, but very much including First Nations, are, with real tangible implications for actions that, amongst others, the Government of Canada needs to take. So there is a tangible benefit. But there is also the fact that a Charter of Rights and Freedoms, particularly ours, exists to protect the most vulnerable in society. It doesn't exist to protect the politicians or the strong. It protects to protect the most vulnerable and to provide consistent protections. And it is, in my view, the responsibility of the Prime Minister personally and the federal government to stand up for the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And that leads to certain tensions sometimes in the Federation in terms of what we will do in intervening, but particularly with respect to areas of federal jurisdictions and fundamental areas, we have to stand up. And, you know, the specific situation that Mr. Poilievre has chosen is a situation where he's overriding the views of the Supreme Court of Canada. Not the views, the decision of the Supreme Court of Canada. So fundamentally overriding a right, however uncomfortable we may view that right. And my final point on this is that it's a question not just of the specific right, where you start with this overriding, but where do you stop? Because it is the powerful, it's the elected that make those rules. And it's the vulnerable and all Canadians who will pay the price for overriding it. So I have a very strong fundamental view in opposition to this importation of an American-style approach to Canada.
Thank you. So the next question comes from Quebec, and it's submitted by Chief Lucien Wabanunuk from Lac Simon and Anishinaabe Council, of course, from Quebec. So his question is, how will Canada ensure that the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is implemented within provinces and territories that have not adopted it yet in legislation?
C'est une bonne question. C'est une question très importante en ce qui concerne UNDRIP et le mettre en œuvre dans toutes les provinces. On commence avec des situations où le gouvernement fédéral est impliqué, c'est-à-dire le financement d'infrastructures, des grands projets, l'échange entre les provinces, l'échange commercial entre les provinces, des droits des citoyens, des droits et libertés des citoyens. So, to translate that, there are many cases where the federal government will be directly implicated, whether it's infrastructure funding, whether it is interprovincial trade, whether it's fundamental rights of Canadians, and in all those cases, we have to directly stand up for those for the full respect and implementation of UNDRIP, Universal Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People, as well. I think we have to show how effective partnership works and how respecting this and living up to all its principles, how that delivers for First Nations, how it delivers for Canada. And we need to use our influence, our ability to encourage all parties in Canada to respect it. It's always delicate with respect to federal and provincial relations, and we do respect provincial competencies, but with the discharge of our federal responsibilities, the commitment of my government, if Canadians do select us, is fundamental and unwavering in its implementation.
So the next question comes from Manitoba, Roseau River First Nation, Southern Manitoba. This question was actually posed to the other party leaders as well. It comes from Councillor Rachel Ferreira. And she says, hydro and gaming operations on our traditional lands generate billions of dollars. First Nations deserve a rightful share. So it's a two-part question. She asks, will you support a national revenue sharing agreement for hydroelectric and gaming revenues with First Nations? Second to that, will you commit to work towards enabling First Nations to have majority ownership and control over those operations and benefits?
Okay, so this is an interesting question. I very much I commit to working with First Nations and given the jurisdictional aspects here, the provinces and the territories, to supporting collaborative approaches to revenue sharing and ownership in these major projects, including hydroelectric projects. I do note the excellent work of the First Nation Major Project Coalition in this regard. I referenced as well this doubling of the capacity of the Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program, which will in effect finance equity shares in these projects and gaining the revenues from them. I'm going to make if I may, I'm going to make a personal note as well. One personal note and my personal commitment to this. I'm a very strong believer in these types of approaches, but I will add that one of the candidates, and I personally recruited a gentleman by the name of Tim Hodgson, who is running in Toronto, the broader Toronto area, and previously, amongst other things, was chair of Hydro One. And when he was chair of Hydro One, brought in the policy. It was one of obviously the leadership that brought in the policy that required First Nations participation in all new hydro electric projects in the province of Ontario, the Hydro One. So we have the commitment, we have my personal commitment, we have the financing, we have the approach, and actually, again, subject to the choice of the Canadian people and the people in Markham. In the case of Mr. Hodgson, we're also going to have people right there at the center of government that can turn these words into very tangible action very quickly, because these are exactly the kind of projects I think if we get this right as a country, we will be building a lot of.
So I'm trying to get to as many questions
Sorry,
as I can.
sorry, I'll be quicker.
Quite a few questions coming in. We have from British Columbia this one. This is from Regional Chief Terry TG, of course, from BC. Regional Chief TG says, will you commit to working with First Nations within your first 100 days of office to secure regional final settlement agreements on children and families that is equitable, fair, and ensures discrimination against our children's needs, our children ends?
The commitment to begin that very important work, absolutely. Part of I'll refer back to previous answers on Jordan's principle, and commitment of capacity of the government to move quickly on this. Of course, in getting those agreements, all sides must come to the table in good faith and achieve it. But yes.
Thank you very much. So this question, I think we touched on a little bit, but I'll come back to this question. This is Chief Kelly LaRocca from Ontario. If re-elected as Prime Minister, will you commit to honor the Trudeau government's commitment to provide clean drinking water to First Nations? What will you do to ensure the civil service is engaged and committed to follow through on your behalf?
Chief Kelly LaRocca, you've gone right to the heart of this as well, which is that I'll just refer back to my previous answer in terms of commitment and some of the elements of process. I do think we will need to re-engineer and centralize and set milestones for the actual process within the civil service. So we're matching commitment, financing, and capacity, development of the capacity in an overall approach. But that is consistent with the broader approach to government that I will intend to bring if we are elected, which is very much focused on results. I think and if I can make a sort of common point, Adam, and I'll hand back to you, which is there's a series of issues here where we need to recognize fundamental rights, First Nations, and enshrine those appropriately. But at the same time, we need to make it tangible and deliver the results. And we need to, and I have a very high focus on how we're actually going to deliver the results in parallel with enshrining the overall rights system. And clean drinking water is, if I may, is one of the classic examples here.
Mm-hmm. So the next question comes from Chief Archie Wabas, who is from Winneman Lake First Nation, remote First Nation in Northern Ontario. And Chief Wabas asks, he says, Mr. Carney, under the James Bay Treaty Number 9, our elders and ancestors understood the agents to share the land and its resources with the Crown based on trust, partnership, and peaceful coexistence, not to surrender or give up the land. The spirit and intent of the treaty, as understood by our ancestors, is very clear. Yet today, resource companies continue to extract wealth from our lands with little to no real sharing of the benefits with our nations. So the question is, why is the current government still allowing this to happen? And if you are elected Prime Minister, what will you do to honor the true spirit and intent of Treaty Number 9, particularly ensuring that Indigenous nations are rightful partners in land and resource sharing?
Yeah, I think we're going to do a couple of things. One is, in general, for resource projects and the approvals necessary for those projects by the federal government, we are going to consolidate and accelerate the speed with which things move. That also means the speed with which resource companies get a no to a project if they're not respecting environmental standards, not acting in partnership, appropriate partnership with First Nations. In parallel, and I know I'm repeating myself, but this is really important. We are making the process of participation, for example, Chief Wabash, a resource project in your area or any area, the ability of a First Nation to finance, to own equity, to be a true partner in that project was much more difficult even 3 months ago than it will be if my government is reelected, because of that 10 billion commitment and the expansion of the process. I said reelected, I mean elected, to be clear, the expansion of the types of projects. So doing both, quick answers, clear guidelines, financing, that all brings it into a possibility or back into this true spirit as it was framed of Treaty Number 9.
Thank you. So this next question, along the same lines, dealing with treaty. So this question comes from Saskatchewan. So Saskatchewan Regional Chief Bobby Cameron. And the question is, what he says is, First Nations have inherent and treaty rights. Our treaties are international agreements made with the British Crown. If elected, would you commit to seeking an in-person meeting with King Charles at the sacred grounds where Treaty 6 was signed, such as Fort Carleton or Fort Pitt, to honor the 150th anniversary of the signing of Treaty 6?
Thank you for the question. I find the suggestion very attractive, very intriguing. Obviously, I can't speak for His Majesty. I would hope that His Majesty will visit Canada soon, and if that does take place, will certainly ensure. And if my government is elected, we'll make sure that suggestion is put on the list. And I would very much look forward to having a discussion with. In fact, maybe I'll just make the request directly online to have a discussion with Chief Cameron on exactly that proposal, so we have more specifics of it, and I can work it through my channels again if I'm in the position that I'm running for.
Thank you. So next question comes from Kelsey Jacko, and the question is on the note of economic versus social impacts. Would your government commit to sitting down with the treaty nations in what is now Alberta before your government makes any final decisions on carbon sequestration? We aren't necessarily against it, but we need help getting the details so we can be fully informed.
Yeah, yes. The short answer is yes. I think any project of, on, pardon me, on First Nations territory by definition, but also anything of that scale requires the consultation and support and participation. And so if we are going to do this and we're going to get it right, as Canada as a whole with First Nations, that consultation is absolutely essential.
Okay, this next question deals with international trade and travel between internationally. This comes from Chief Roy, and Chief Roy asks, what steps would your government, I think I lost it here, there it is. What steps would your government take to recognize the Jay Treaty, recognizing our right to free trade between our First Nations in North America?
It is something I'll give you a straight answer on that, which is something I have asked for more detailed understanding of. I fully recognize the rights. We have to ensure that it's in recognizing those rights, it is consistent with whatever partnership we end up with the United States. Or let me say that slightly differently, that any partnership we have with the United States does not affect those rights. That's probably the better way to frame it. I think we all know, and it was referenced at the start, and probably bears repeating that this is a very fluid situation, and what we have to do is address the crisis. It is a crisis with the United States, and come to an accommodation there if that is in the interests of Canada and is the interests of First Nations.
Thank you. So the next question that's been brought forward, deals with language. And of course, this is something that's important to me as well. I spoke in my language initially. Our elder knowledge keeper, as part of his prayer, spoke in his language, and we had national chief speak in her language as well. So the question is, if elected, what steps will you take to protect the revitalization and teaching of Indigenous languages?
Yeah, well, I think one of the crucial things that I believe is that children and their parents, their families, language is so central to identity and culture, and that's true for all of us. It's true maybe more poignantly, certainly for First Nations, also with respect to Franco-Canadians, y compris the Québécois, Québécoises. So what we will do is to continue to support community-driven projects that restore and promote and protect First Nations cultures and languages. I think we will, or my intention is, again, subject to being elected, is that we would have this as part of a broader set of initiatives with respect to our identity and culture in Canada. So in other words, that we would have some funding that promotes First Nations languages as part of a broader effort to promote the other languages and diversity in this country. So that is additive to the specifics that I just mentioned.
Thank you. So we're starting to wind down. This might be the last question, but we have others lined up. Question comes from Chief Janelle Namebin, and Chief Janelle Namebin asks, she says, Canada has been participating in the United Nations plastic treaty negotiations. How are you looking out for First Nations rights and treaty promises at those tables? And the question is, how will you push for inclusion of the United Nations rights of Indigenous peoples in those negotiations?
My intention, to be clear, is that in any of these negotiations, including the plastics negotiations, which, as those who follow it may know, are quite complex and uncertain in terms of their conclusion. Canada's pushing hard, but intention is to ensure that that there is that inclusion and that consultation inclusion. I will take that question and take the spirit of the other questions as well, but I will take that back and run down, if you will, the exact steps that have been taken in this regard. I think knowing the relevant ministers who've been leading this, particularly up until very recently, Minister Guilbeault, my expectation is that this has been very integrated, but sometimes you don't know all the details, and in this case, I actually don't know the specifics of that. So rather than lead too much, let me commit to running this down. But I'll say one other thing, is that certainly over the course of the last 10 years, and I will reinforce this, as I said at the start, Canada has always had, from that period, and will have, if my party is elected as government, in full Indigenous participation at the United Nations. And that is, and of course, the Plastics Treaty is under the United Nations auspices. So it's my only hesitancy is I haven't actually looked at the very specifics of that process since I became Prime Minister. but it's a fundamental commitment, and therefore it must be there. But I just want to make sure that it's being managed properly. But the general principle, the general approach, and I hope this comes through, Adam, and to those who've been kind enough to join this session, is one of full consultation, participation, partnership, nation to nation, and development together at a crucial time in our nation's history. And if I may say, and I know we're running short on time, well, actually, Adam, I'll hand back to you just so I make sure you're being allowed to run the show.
Yep, thank you very much. So we're going to transition into your closing comments, but I'm just looking through. We do have we have a number of questions still. We're unfortunately not able to get to all of them. I'm just taking a quick look to see if there's any short ones. Trying to transition here into some of the questions. But what we'll do at this point is, because of timing, and it's very important that we close in a good way, that we go to our knowledge keeper in a good way, but we also would like to provide a couple of minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, maybe 2 minutes, back to you for closing comments, and then we can close in a good way. So thank you very much, Mr. Carney. Any final concluding comments?
Well, thank you, Adam. Merci beaucoup, tout le monde. I hope what I very much enjoyed. First off, I commend the AFN for convening this session. It's exceptionally helpful for me and for my team. Secondly, thank you for your questions and the priorities that they're clearly underscored by them. Thirdly, I hope that in the responses and the approach, you see two things. First is that a commitment to the fundamental rights of First Nations and a commitment to the recognition of those fundamental rights and an upholding and defense of those fundamental rights. But related to that, a commitment to practical, high-impact solutions that realize those rights, whether it's of children, whether it's to clean drinking water, whether it's to fully sharing in initiatives for economic prosperity. And that's what my government would bring, both the principles and the values, the defense, but the practical approach to move forward in true partnership together. For me, those are essential elements. All of those elements are essential to continue to move forward on this process of reconciliation. Thank you, Adam. I will hand back to you.
Thank you so much, Mark Carney, of course, current Prime Minister and leader of the Liberal Party of Canada. Again, thank you so much for joining us. And just a reminder to everyone watching that the video sessions, these sessions of all 4 leaders' sessions will be available on the AFN website, and we'll have further information on how to access those. And of course, this has been a special series put on by and hosted by the Assembly of First Nations. This is the first time that the Assembly of First Nations has done this. So I'd like to thank National Chief for her leadership in having this put in place. Of course, National Chief Cindy Woodhouse-Nepenak. Of course, there's a big team behind the scenes doing an excellent job. Thank you so much for all the work in setting this up. I know my contact for this has been Kiri Tristeri. Thank you so much. And thanks to everybody that's been involved. So my name is Adam Fiddler. Thank you so much. I'd like to invite Knowledge Keeper Leonard Weasel Traveler now to close this session and close this series in a prayer.
Thank you very much. It's definitely a pleasure and an honor to be of support and service to the chiefs, and I appreciate the time that was given by our Prime Minister, and give you the best wishes in your campaign. And my prayer again will be for the support of our First Nations. I know personally of the challenges of a great number of them. There's the violence of poverty and the other challenges that are there from social issues and matters. And so I pray for all our people across Canada, all our chiefs, and again for you, Mark Carney, and your government. I pray that you have a successful campaign. Creator, again, I go to you in humility. I ask you for blessings and all the things that we need to move forward on a day-to-day basis. I pray for our Prime Minister Mark Carney. I pray for our National Chief, Cindy Woodhouse. I pray for all the AFN regional chiefs, all the chiefs across Canada, the councillors, the elders, our young people, the youth. I pray for good holistic health, mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. And yes, we need financial help in all these areas. I ask you for those things in the humility, Creator, to bless us and to give you thanks and appreciation for all the past gifts that we receive, things that we take for granted. I ask you for these blessings. Hayos patapio, na tus, kokana sukapi, hamusi kanoxisi, o kikaka kopio. Amo namin tukupi man si watanan, amo nina, hanakawachipio kinana no. Itaoxenan, kanamian streets the people, nakawachipio kina, imatu kina. Thank you very much as my prayer to the Creator for all the blessings that we need today. Amen.
Miigwech, thank you so much, Knowledge Keeper Leonard Weasel Traveler. Miigwech, pinanaskamadin, kakana, wajit.